Our planet has been around for about 4.5 billion years. If you map out the entire 14 billion year history of the universe, our species, Homo sapiens, only show up in the last 250,000 years. We occupy a microscopic, hair-thin sliver at the very end of the timeline. For most of the history of life on Earth, biological progress was agonizingly slow. DNA accumulates information and adapts to the environment through random genetic errors over millions of generations. If a mutation happened to work, a species survived. Then, roughly 70,000 years ago, a biological glitch bypassed this cycle. Early humans developed advanced social structures and complex language in an evolutionary leap we now call the cognitive revolution. Collective learning transformed the human brain into a biological network. For the first time, one person's discovery could be taught to an entire tribe and preserved for their descendants, moving knowledge through culture instead of waiting for genetic evolution. Humans weaponized a capacity for shared fictions. By agreeing on the validity of invisible concepts, like gods, money, or social hierarchies, millions of complete strangers could organize and act as a single, coordinated unit. You can see this organization take physical shape in ancient Mesopotamia. People living between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers began building massive pyramid-shaped towers, turning the movements of the stars into organized religions and local myths into enforced legal codes. To manage the sheer volume of information, they invented written language. It acted as an external hard drive for the species, allowing crop records, deaths, and philosophical ideas to survive long after the human brain that conceived them was gone. With shared fictions holding society together and writing preserving the instructions, early humans stopped merely surviving their harsh environments. They became a highly coordinated, exponential conquering force. The engine driving this coordination was agriculture. About 10,000 years ago, an energy bonanza caused by a warming global climate convinced humans to stop wandering as nomadic foragers. They settled down to domesticate crops like wheat and breed livestock. Farming was a trap. The massive surplus of food caused populations to explode, creating the first cities. But it also forced people into rigid hierarchies. The concept of land ownership was born, bringing with it monotonous physical labor, strict diets, and severe social inequality. Rulers quickly realized they could leverage these agricultural hubs. A king named Sargon of Akkad recognized that ruling a single city was inefficient. By using military force and a unified system of administration, he conquered his neighbors and established the world's first true empire. While the average person was trapped in a cycle of back-breaking farm work and rigid class structures, their collective labor fueled an unstoppable mechanism for imperial expansion. What followed was a blur of rapid conquest. The Bronze Age gave way to the Iron Age, and localized city-states morphed into massive, continent-spanning military machines that continuously overthrew one another. The scale of this expansion was often driven by pure ego. Alexander the Great led his armies to conquer the majority of the known world, becoming so consumed by his own power that he decided he was literally a god. When he died, his generals immediately carved up his territory. Kings died and borders collapsed, yet the shared fictions outlived them. Concepts like the Phoenician alphabet, the democratic experiments of Athens, and the teachings of Buddhism spread globally, proving far more resilient than any standing army. By the 16th century, humanity shifted gears with the scientific revolution. Instead of relying purely on biological reproduction or social organization, human progress became driven by the deliberate, systematic pursuit of new knowledge and technology. When that scientific method met the emerging economic system of capitalism, it sparked the Industrial Revolution. Mass production in factories required raw materials on a planetary scale, which European powers secured through aggressive, technology-driven imperialism. By combining our ancient ability to believe in shared fictions with modern scientific progress, we stopped building isolated kingdoms. We engineered a completely interconnected, global machine of commerce and power. But the cognitive revolution had a dark duality. The exact same capacity for massive collaboration that built the factories and shipping routes also enabled systemic oppression and industrialized warfare. In the 20th century, Modern secular ideologies like fascism and extreme nationalism began functioning exactly like ancient religions. They demanded absolute loyalty, justifying the mass mobilization of millions of citizens for brutal conflict. This chart details the staggering death tolls of the Second World War. Over 50 million people were killed. Notice the asymmetry. Over half the casualties were Russians, alongside 6 million Poles and 2 million Chinese citizens, highlighting massive civilian losses. The darkest elements of human invention reached their terrifying logical endpoint in the Holocaust. The deliberate murder of millions of Jews and minorities reduced genocide from a brutal act of war to a horrifyingly efficient science. The irony is inescapable. The scientific revolution granted humanity godlike technological power, but our toxic shared fictions nearly drove us to total annihilation. Despite the devastation of the 20th century, we rebuilt. Today, we exist in a hyper-connected, fully globalized world where information travels across the planet in milliseconds. Humanity is now merging its history with artificial intelligence and biotechnology. These fields move with an intensity that suggests our next evolutionary shift will be technological rather than biological. We now engineer the chemical foundations of life. We are rewriting the DNA strands that once required millions of years of random mutation to change. If we can replace failing organs with synthetic parts or augment our cognitive abilities with integrated logic, we begin to diverge from the biological constraints that defined our ancestors. This trajectory leads to a version of humanity that may eventually be unrecognizable to the Homo sapiens of today. We conquered the Earth because we are the only species capable of inventing and believing in shared myths. But as we look to the future, our ultimate survival depends entirely on whether our collective wisdom can finally outpace the destructive power of our own creations.